That was good timing.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's hot in my office if I don't have the window open, and I live on a busy street.
Oh no, no worries. It was just once the recording hit, and then you hear this bike. I thought something was wrong at first. I was like, oh no. Welcome to Weird Reads. I'm Jason White, your host, and this week I am talking to somebody I've talked to before, but it's been a very long time since we've talked, and that is Todd Keisling. Todd Keisling is a two-time Bram Stoker Award-nominated writer known for such titles as Devil's Creek, Scanlines, Cold, Black, and Infinite, and his latest novel, The Sundowner's Dance. Two of his previous works received University of Kentucky Oswald Research and Creativity Prize for creative writing in 2002 and 2005. Additionally, his novel, The Luminal Man, was a finalist for the Indie Book Award and Horror Suspense in 2013. He resides in Pennsylvania with his family. Welcome to the show, Todd.
Thanks for having me, man. It's been a long time.
It has. I was looking. Well, the last time we spoke was for the Darkness Dwells podcast, and I think it was probably around 2017, somewhere around there. I can't look it up because it's dead. There's only about 10 episodes that have survived.
Yeah, lots happened since then.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think the last time we talked, if my memory serves me correctly, I think we were discussing something that you were doing with Crystal Lake Publishing at the time. Yeah, something like that anyway.
That would have been Ugly Little Things, my first collection.
Oh, maybe it was that. Yeah. I could see it being that. Yeah, absolutely. So how have you been since then? It's been a long road.
Yeah, it has. A lot has happened since the Crystal Lake days. I'm good. As with anybody, I think, ups and downs, but it's been a wild ride for sure.
Yeah, you've released quite a bit since then, too.
Yeah, quite a bit.
I mean, you have your second short story collection, which is Cold, Black, and Infinite. That came out a couple of years ago, or
that was 2023.
Yeah. So how's that been doing?
Well, it was doing well until I had to pull the books from Cemetery Dance.
Oh right, yeah, I forgot all about that.
Yeah. For the listeners who aren't familiar, I had some issues with the publisher of Cemetery Dance, and we decided to part ways.
Mm-hmm. And this was fairly recently, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a little over a month ago, I think. But the good news is that my Cemetery Dance titles, which are Devil's Creek and Cold, Black, and Infinite, already have a new home. Bad Hand Books will be publishing them in the spring of next year.
Excellent. Well, congratulations on finding a new home for them.
Thank you.
And I wish you the best of luck in regards to that. I was listening in preparation for this interview. I was listening to a couple of interviews and whatnot, and I remember what stuck out in one thing was that you said that you get excited about people reading your new work, and I had to wonder, do you ever feel nervous too? Maybe people won't understand what, especially if it's different.
Yeah, I was super nervous about the Sundowner's Dance. The week before it released, I was a nervous wreck, and I was just so stressed out, not just because of the release, but because of personal things going on. And it was a huge relief when it released, and people have been reacting so positively to it. And some people are saying it's the best thing I've written yet. And trust me, I was nervous as hell because it is vastly different from my other stuff. And I get nervous before any release because you never know how people are going to react. It's like, well, will people get it? Will they not? Is this the one that's going to break out of, you know, the indie world and get readers from outside that sphere? And that's always the goal, is to just reach as many people as possible. And, you know, I've been pretty fortunate in that, you know, most of my work is generally reviewed fairly well. I haven't had a miss yet, if you can call it that. I'm sure that will happen at some point in the future, because it's, you know, not every one of them is going to be a banger, no matter how hard I try.
Yeah.
But with this one in particular, it has continued to surprise me as the, you know, days go on from release.
Yeah. The reason why I ask is because I was writing way back in 2010 and 12, and I released a short story collection. And then I kind of took like a 8-year hiatus because I was working this job that just sucked all my energy and my life from me. And I finally got out of that job. Now I'm writing again, and I've released a couple of things since switching jobs. And but I have a couple more things coming out that are vastly different. And I'm afraid of how audience reaction will be to that, because like the other stuff was fun, like nasty, gory horror. The next two that I plan on releasing anyway are pretty serious and maybe a little more well written, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. You write a lot of short stories as well. Do you have a preference? Do you prefer writing short stories, or do you like writing longer stories?
So I don't feel like I read a lot of short stories, but you know, I appreciate the vote of confidence there. I like short fiction for the gratification of, you know, I only had to spend a week putting this thing together and it's done, or a draft of it's done. Meanwhile, versus long form stuff that can take months or years. But so I like short stories in that respect, but writing short stories is infinitely harder, I think, than long form, because you only have like a set amount of, you know, word real estate to build the world, you know, and bring your characters to life, and have a plot that actually, you know, can get in and get out and it can, you know, in that confinement, and have it be punchy and, you know, hopefully knock the reader's socks off. Whereas a novel, you have time and space to develop everything.
Yeah.
And so there are aspects of writing short stories that I like for the brevity of it, but everything I write always has a bigger picture in my head. And writing novels allows me to indulge that more. So I think I enjoy writing long form. I don't enjoy writing short form as much, but I find that the result is often better than my long form.
As in like more, as in like more satisfying?
I mean, short stories are an exercise of basically like taking yourself and putting you on your A game, whether you like it or not. You don't really have a choice, because every word matters. Whereas, you know, writing a novel, your words have more time and room to breathe.
Yeah.
And you can, you know, refine that and whittle that down. Short stories, you don't necessarily always have that luxury, because usually if I'm writing a short story, it's because someone asked me to, or I agreed to for a publication. And, you know, I don't have a huge turnaround time. I don't have, you know, I would say turnaround time is probably the biggest thing for me, because I tend to take years to construct stories in my head. And like, we'll get into that with Sundowners and stuff, but, you know, Devil's Creek is another example where, you know, I had the idea for Devil's Creek in my head for like over a decade. And, it took years for me to get to the point where I felt confident enough that I could write it. Short fiction, on the other hand, is where, an editor might come to you and say, hey, will you write something for me? I need it in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's a different mindset, but it also forces you to kind of be more selective in your language and how the story is told and everything.
And
it's a different frame of mind that is more difficult for me to get into, I think. But that's from the technical perspective. As an author, I'll do either one. Like, I can switch, to write short stuff or long form, but if I had my preference, I would probably just do the long form stuff. Mm-hmm. But short fiction is a nice little exercise.
Yeah.
To kind of sharpen you a little bit, for the longer stuff.
I like what you said there about taking a long time to write a longer piece of story, because you have the idea. I don't know if it's similar to what I go through, because I'll have an idea in my head and I don't know exactly maybe where it needs to go when I first attempt to write it, and you get partway through, maybe you finish the manuscript, but something feels off about it, so you keep approaching it. Do you do that too, like where you just keep coming back to a story that just doesn't feel like it's working until you get it right?
Yeah, absolutely. I have folders in my files for stories that are still unfinished that, Sundowner's Dance began like that.
Mm-hmm.
There were multiple times where I tried to write Devil's Creek, and if it wasn't working, I would just put it aside, save it for later, and come back to it when I felt ready. So yeah, I absolutely do that. I've never not done that, I think, because I might think that I'm ready for a story, but the story's not ready yet.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I like that. I remember when you were writing Devil's Creek, she used to post updates about it on Facebook a lot.
Yeah.
And I remember you kept putting the word count so far in it. And I remember you'd be like, man, this one's getting long. It's going to kill me.
Yeah, my professional goal for the rest of my life is to never write anything as long as Devil's Creek ever again.
Yeah. I'll be going back to that actually
Okay.
in a bit, because it kind of ties into some of the questions I have about the Sundowner's Dance. But before we get into the Sundowner's Dance, I do want to go into a little bit about your Southland Mythos.
Sure.
Can you tell us what the Southland Mythos are?
So I haven't actually worked up like a pitch for what the Southland is. So I say that to say that I don't have any sexy way of, putting it, in one or two sentences. So this is going to be a rambly answer, and I apologize.
No, I like rambling.
So the Southland Mythos is my sandbox that I've created for myself. It's stories that predominantly exist in the Appalachian region of the United States, eastern U.S., primarily Kentucky, some Tennessee, West Virginia, Pennsylvania. I'm not really as familiar with the Carolinas, so I haven't gone there yet in fiction, but there is a story that I wrote for an anthology several years ago that it's also the first story in Coal, Black, and Infinite, called Midnight in the Southland. And it's about it introduces a radio personality along the same lines as like Art Bell from Coast to Coast AM. Mm-hmm. His name is Gus Guthrie. He is a radio DJ, or was. He passed away in 2002. And so also the 90s in Kentucky and the surrounding regions. He discussed and took calls from people who have experienced strange things in the area. And he basically referred to the phenomenon as the Southland. So, on one level, that's what the Southland is. It comes from this radio program called Midnight in the Southland. But in the larger scheme of things, it is my contribution to a larger cosmic horror pantheon, namely Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos, Azathoth, and all of his gods and stuff that he created in his fiction. I grew up reading Lovecraft, but I could never relate to the setting because it was all in New England, and I'd never been out of Kentucky before.
Mm-hmm.
So I started building this sandbox that I could, base my fiction in, with its own set of rules and pantheon of gods. But it is adjacent to Lovecraft's own mythos. They exist in the same universe, essentially.
Interesting.
Thank you, public domain. So that's kind of in my head, that's a bit of what the Southland mythos is. It's, all these different stories that are all in a region, and that all these strange things that happen in said stories can be traced back to something I can't tell you yet, because it would be a massive spoiler for what I have planned down the road.
Awesome. Yeah. Now, how did you develop the mythos? Was it like you found some similarities that kept repeating in your work, or?
It was an accident.
Yeah.
Like Devil's Creek is the centerpiece of the mythos currently, but I didn't know it was called the Southland Mythos when I wrote that book.
Nice.
Midnight in the Southland is what really kind of brought it to life a little bit, and calling it the Southland Mythos just made sense. But no, it wasn't planned at the time, but now that I have a better grasp of what it is and how everything connects, everything I'm doing going forward, will exist in the Southland Mythos of some kind, in some form or fashion.
That's really cool. I also like how it's kind of related to Lovecraft mythos. How do you create your own without sort of not copying what Lovecraft did?
I wish I had a good answer. It's mostly just imagination. I think about what I would imagine a cosmic entity would look like, or how it would operate, or why it would operate here. And I also try to figure out ways that it would make sense for it to be in Appalachia.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the biggest connection there is because Appalachia is like oldest mountain range on the planet. It predates fossil record. Like, the mountains in Appalachia are rounded because they've been weathered over time.
Mm-hmm.
And, if anything were to, any cosmic entity would be here, it would most likely be, have something to do with the Appalachian mountain range.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's already like a lot of weird stories that are attached to Appalachian, history and even current events.
Yeah. So, I look at Appalachia much like Lovecraft looked at Antarctica for, at the Mountains of Madness. It's this ancient area that has a lot of history and is foreign to a lot of people. But difference is it's not a desert of ice. It is a lush, vibrant region where weird shit always happens.
Where the earth is sour.
Maybe.
Some part. Now, Can you tell us what the Sundowner's Dance is about, and how does Sundowner's Dance fit into your mythos?
Sure. So the Sundowner's Dance, we pitched that as the movie Cocoon meets Lovecraft's The Color Out of Space.
I love that.
That's the elevator pitch. It is the story of a recent retired widower who is mourning the loss of his wife. He decides to downsize after he retires and to get away from a lot of the memories in their house that they had together. So he buys a place in this over 55 retirement community up in the Poconos called Fairview Acres. And it's weird for him from the get-go. He hates his neighbors. They're all very they're not acting their age, so to speak. They are partying every night. He hears footsteps crossing his rooftop every night. And it gets stranger and stranger and far more sinister as the story goes along. I can't tell you how it ties into the mythos because that's a major spoiler.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we continue, I do want to say that I thoroughly enjoyed this book.
Thank you.
It's very well done. I really enjoy reading horror stories, though, with elderly protagonists. And I'm assuming you do as well, because you really nailed it, I feel.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, Sundowner's Dance was supposed to be a short story, but it kept getting longer on you. Therefore, you continued to resist writing it, from my understanding. What was it that kept you writing it?
So, let's touch upon the resistance aspect first. Because that leads into why I kept writing it. Initially, I started writing it like not too long after I started, or after I'd finished up the first draft of Devil's Creek, and that's the longest thing I've ever written, and I don't want to write anything that long ever again. So writing a short story felt like a good palate cleanser, you know?
Yeah.
And then I started developing these characters and this neighborhood of people, and I realized, oh, shit, this wants to be longer. Pump the brakes, put this in a folder, let's work on something else.
Yeah.
And I went back to it initially because I got invited to an anthology where it would have been a good fit if it could be contained in 5,000 words.
Mm-hmm.
So I initially went back to it some years later with the hope of salvaging like the seed of the story and just turning it into a short story. But as I kept reading it and revisiting some of the, those familiar scenes and thinking about the characters again, I realized, okay, this is going to be a novella at least. So I pursued it under that, with that intent. Okay, this is a novella. I'm going to write a novella. It's only going to be a novella. It's not going to be longer than 40,000 words.
Mm-hmm.
And then while writing it, my wife had a cancer scare. And there was a lot of things were uncertain. And I got really depressed. And I was kind of clinging to the book, to what became the book, in order to deal with a lot of the scariest things that we were having to go through while she was waiting on, biopsy results and, the general silence that you wait from, you live in
Mm-hmm.
between the time that you understand that you have something in your body that has to be biopsied until the moment that you get the call and you get the results of, said biopsy. So for about 2.5 weeks, I was in it. I was, pretty caught up in my own fears, and I had the book to keep me anchored to reality, I think. If not, I probably would have had a nervous breakdown, to be honest.
Yeah.
It was a tough time, but that's why when it crossed that line and I realized, okay, this isn't a novella, this actually is a book.
Yeah.
I kind of embraced it because it helped. It gave me an outlet for all the tumultuous things that were, swirling around in my brain at the time.
Yeah. You mentioned that in your afterword, and I'm happy to say that things turned out okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
She just had her screening a couple of months ago. She's all clear for the year. She goes back next year for another screening. And yeah, knock wood, everything's fine.
Yeah. But did you find that, because you said that it helped anchor you and keep you going, did you find that it was also sort of maybe a dark meditation on what would happen if things were to go south?
Yeah, absolutely. It was writing the book was my way of processing everything and coming to terms with everything.
Yeah. In your Sundowner stance, you also mentioned, and you mentioned here in the interview, that it was meant to be a short story, and you started working on it soon after Devil's Creek, and then you put it away, and then you went back to it because you said that you weren't ready to start another novel yet. So that made me think, because I've experienced this too. Do you find that writing novels exhausts your creativity sometimes?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I spent all of last year writing a novel, and let me think about this. I finished that. I wrote a really short story for Weird Tales. I wrote that story at the very end of last year, and then I didn't write anything until like March of this year. I basically had 3 months where I just had to recuperate, and that's I find it gets harder every time I do it, and that's a me thing. I know some authors who, it's not difficult at all. They can sit down and crank out, a story every couple of days if they really wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, the older I get, especially, I have to consider my mental battery.
Mm-hmm.
In the time since we last talked, Jason, I mean, I found out I'm on the spectrum. I have ADHD. I have severe depression. I have severe anxiety. I have all these things, and I had to start thinking about the time I spend working on something, on a single thing. I have to consider, I have to be more cognizant of how much time I'm spending, because there's always a toll I have to pay. Yeah. So if I'm focused on a single creative project for, say, 6 hours in a day, well, I'm going to need almost equal amount of time to come down from that. Gone are the days where I could just, work until 2 or 3 in the morning, mm-hmm. and then go right to sleep.
Yeah.
If I do that now, I'm going to be awake for 2 or 3 hours trying to wind my brain down, mm-hmm. Before I can rest, and it just throws the rest, the following day completely off the rails. So when I say it gets harder the older I get, it's because of that.
Yeah.
It's because, I have to think about, all right, if I'm going to write today, how long do I need to write? How long do I want to write for? And then I kind of have to plan other things around that. Not necessarily around the writing itself, but the recuperation after being creative.
What do you do to recuperate and replenish?
Sometimes I'll take a nap. Sometimes I'll play a video game, watch a movie, go outside, take a walk. Anything that isn't creative. Like, mm-hmm. It's summertime now, so I'll go outside and mow the grass. something very autonomous that just gives me time to process my thoughts. So,
Do you find that your thoughts are empty, like in the creative end, like you're not consciously thinking about things, but when you go back to it, the answer maybe that you're looking for is there?
not necessarily empty per se. It's like I kind of have to divorce myself from the world that I was living in.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. I kind of have to give myself distance. I need to stop thinking about things in terms of plot threads, and because it's a strange feeling to go from living and breathing this world that you are creating with words to then going out into the real world, and you start looking at observing and start connecting dots that aren't really there.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like, oh, I wonder how that got there. Well, it was probably this, which was caused by this and this, and that's the ADHD in my brain. I think it starts manifesting plot threads that aren't there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an easy way for me to spiral if I do that. So I try to. It's no different than like when I do in-person events now. I can put on the mask and wear the suit for a few days at most, but then I'm going to be useless for a week after that. It's a lot of time where I have to like be alone in the dark and just reduce sensory, input as much as possible. I don't know. It's a good question because I've never really had to think about it in those terms before, but
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like you have, when you're done, you're just a bundle of raw nerves,
Yeah.
and you kind of just have to ease yourself back into your skin a little bit.
Yeah, I can kind of identify with that, to be honest with you. Another interesting note in the afterword is that this Sundowner's dance was meant to be a collaborative effort with Chad Lutzke, which I had no idea about until I read that. How did that happen and then not happen?
He had been looking for, someone to write something with. He approached me about it. I said, hey, I've got this. I guess this might have been like later in 2018. It was after I'd put the story away initially.
Mm-hmm.
And he approached me and I said, hey, I've got this, tell me what you think. And he read what I had. It was about 11,000 words at the time. He had some suggestions on how to approach it as a duo. So we basically started over. And I realized at that point in time, like, there are certain aspects of, to a story I need to know before I start writing it. And Chad is entirely a pantser.
Mm-hmm.
And it just wasn't going to work. So, like, I read a little bit of what he had, and I wasn't really feeling the direction. No shade to Chad. He's a fantastic writer, and I wish he would write more.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, I'd never collaborated with anybody. I still haven't. I probably never will because, I'm very particular about my process.
Yeah.
So that's why it never happened. And I also just wasn't in the right headspace at the time. I think it would have worked better if we had come up with the idea together. And I think the project was probably doomed from the start because we were working on something that I had already started. Mm-hmm. So in my head, I had preconceived notions about where it should go. So fast forward to the anthology invite, and I was looking at the story again. I basically took the original manuscript before Chad and I got involved with it, and basically started over from there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's Chad, the novel.
Chad's awesome. He's been a guest on this show a few times. It's been a couple of years though. I need to get him back on, see how he's doing. All right, back to Sundowner's Dance. I have to say I love the protagonist, Jerry, because in all honesty, I feel like I could end up like him, alone and elderly, grumpy and grieving.
Yeah, Jerry is pretty much a reflection of how I saw myself in my 70s if I don't have my wife to balance me out.
Yeah.
Just, isolating and want to be left alone.
Yeah. I can totally identify with that because I can be the same way. I often kind of shut out the world and just crawl into my own head where, where sometimes I hide maybe a little too long.
Same.
And I also felt that you nailed what grief and depression is like. I also suffer from major depression. It's something I've had all my life. And there may be some other issues there that have gone undiagnosed, but it costs a lot of money to go get diagnosis for those things. So I've just left it. But I also like how you nailed how it's like being introverted.
Yep. That was the aspects of introversion with Jerry. It was more of a convenience to the story to explain why why he is the way he is. But once I made the commitment to that character trait, I wanted to at least get it right. And I'm well adept at being an introvert. And, when people think of introverts, they think, oh, they just don't want to be around people. And that is true. But they also don't understand, and this gets lost in translation a lot of times, especially in other media like movies where, somebody's a loner. They never touch upon the cost that must be paid by the introvert if they are forced into a social situation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can be social. I can, like I mentioned at in-person events, like conferences, I can do that. But it's, there is a proportional amount of time where I need to be alone after that event is over.
Yeah.
Like, I can't, the world becomes too much. It's like I become too sensitive to everything around me and I have to pull back again. And, it was harder to understand when I was younger, when I didn't have the context of everything that's going on up here, Now I get it. I have a social battery and it depletes way faster than most neurotypical people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's never going to change. In fact, it's probably going to get worse.
I think honestly it'll get worse because that's what I've experienced. When I was younger, I could like hang out with people a lot longer and not feel as depleted as I do now when just hanging out in a room full of people that I work with for an hour, how that exhausts me and then I can't like focus on anything after.
I honestly don't know how I worked in corporate for as long as I did.
Mm-hmm.
I've been freelance 100% for 5 years now. And the longer I'm, working for myself, and whenever I look back and think, like, I don't know how the hell I did that for 13 years.
Yeah.
And it, because no wonder I was fucking depressed. No wonder I was, exhausted all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was having to be on for 10 hours a day, every day.
Mm-hmm. One thing I like about the job I have now, I'm generally alone, so that's great. But there's periods of time where you're in that room of people, and everyone's laughing and joking around, which is great. But it has, like you said, a cost to it. Yeah. I also want to talk about Arthur because I found him to be an interesting antagonist. Arthur, he doesn't come across quite like in your face as a bad guy. He just wants Jerry to like participate.
Well, he has ulterior motives. He does, definitely, yeah.
But I like how Jerry kind of hates him right away, and that makes the reader kind of hate him too. Like I don't just like when I was reading Arthur, there's nothing overtly bad about him when you first meet him, but and your skill as a writer makes us suspect him anyway, and I think it's because of Jerry.
Yeah. So when it came to coming up with an antagonist to Jerry, I needed a foil, someone who, like, what is the worst possible person that an introvert could encounter?
Yeah.
A fucking extrovert.
And one who's leader of the pack.
and there's nothing worse than a very charismatic, extroverted person who is hell-bent on having you be included in something. And I wanted that dynamic. I wanted that friction because it was the only way. It was the perfect way, to me anyway. I thought it was the perfect way to not just exacerbate the tension a little bit, but also just to really put a contrast on how introverted Jerry is in the story.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's kind of where Arthur came from. I needed him to be like a force of nature in a lot of ways, where everything he stands for is in opposition to what, our hero stands for.
Yeah. One thing I really enjoyed about reading this book is that you leave little Easter eggs for readers, especially like if you follow social media at all. There's always writers that come up, and it's because we're all reading these writers. Writers like S.A. Cosby. S.A. Cosby makes an appearance, and so does Lansdale. And when Jerry's remembering his life with Abby, because she read a lot of books. I wanted to point that out because I love this aspect of the book. Is this something you do with a lot of your work? Do you just like because I don't remember it before, but
no, I started doing it once I had, it's all Southland related stuff. Like it's or are you talking about just name dropping other authors?
Name dropping authors, because it's always awesome to see.
I mean, I have. It's not, it's something I just the way I ended up using Sean's name, when one of Abby's books that Jerry picks up and starts reading, I had Blacktop Wasteland on my desk.
Mm-hmm.
And anytime anytime I'm writing and a character or a thing comes up that needs a name, I usually just look around.
Yeah, me too.
And or if I need a character name for somebody that isn't he's just a supporting character, I'll, what song am I listening to? Who's the singer for that band, or who's the drummer? I'll pick a name out of the hat, essentially. But Lansdale's written some crime stuff, and Cosby is kind of the guy right now for crime fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And it just seemed like a good fit. Who's contemporary, who's classic, that would make sense to throw out in this story. Beyond that, I really don't put a lot of thought into it, to be honest.
Awesome. Oh, did any of the character you kind of mix? I think you write mostly from the seat of your pants, but you do very basic outline, like where the story's going.
Yeah, I need a beginning. I need to know where it's going to end up, even if it changes along the way.
Yeah,
it's a guidepost, and I need a title.
I like that it changes even if you have an idea of where it's going. So my next question is, did any of the characters surprise you with how they developed during the writing process of this?
Yeah. Lisa Donnelly, Catherine's daughter.
Yes.
She was only going to be just a nurse. And until the moment that she showed up at Jerry's doorstep, that was, I was right on track to make it a novella. And then she showed up, and it completely changed the whole outlook and of the plot, because he was too strong of a character to just be the nurse.
Yeah.
And, you know, she's very much a reflection of her mother in a lot of ways. And she was too intriguing for me to just sweep her under the rug. But by bringing her to, you know, front and center stage in the book, it meant, you know, it kind of broadened the horizon a lot in a lot of ways and changed things plot wise. So Lisa's definitely a surprise. Katherine was a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the characters grew organically. You know, starting out, I knew who Jerry was, and he's named after my late grandfather, as a matter of fact. So he was kind of my model at first, you know, and that changed over the many drafts, because Jerry quickly became a reflection of myself that I saw, you know, in another 30 years.
Yeah.
Arthur, initially, when I started writing the story, Arthur was just a figurehead. You know, he didn't really have any depth. So that also grew into something more sinister. Yeah. Arthur's wife, Gladys, she was a surprise. A fun surprise.
She was a fun surprise to read, too. Actually, all the characters are kind of fun in their own way, because you never know what's going to happen, right? But this story has, like, I don't know, it just, I didn't know where it was going, and I it was pleasantly surprised by the end, honestly.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's like the ending is I don't want to say it's not too dark, but it does end on kind of a dark note. But
the ending, it couldn't have ended any other way. Like,
yeah.
that was always the end that I had in mind. Aspects of it changed, but I knew it was going to be a bit of a tearjerker if I did my job correctly, and It seems like I did, because everybody comments on the ending.
Oh man, the beginning had me, like, you know, wiping up my eyes too, just with what Jerry was going through. Made me think of me and my own life, you know, like what am I going to do? Because no one might. It's probably a terrible thing to say, but I was going to say, knowing my luck, she'll go first.
Yeah, don't tempt the universe like that.
No, I don't want to tempt the universe like that. Yeah. And another interesting fact about this book is that it was influenced by the movie The Burbs, which is a favorite of mine.
Oh, I love The Burbs.
Yeah. When I was doing the Darkness Dwells podcast with my old co-host, Michael Schutz, we did an episode on The Burbs. And that was a lot of, like, I've seen it a few times and I own the movie, but it's a lot of fun. I can see some interesting comparisons.
I was spitballing ideas with some friends a few weeks ago about, you know, if this were to get optioned for a film, who would you want to see play? And I'm like, well, Tom Hanks has to be Jerry.
Yeah,
I mean, come on,
that would be perfect.
But you know, I even mentioned the Klopex in the book. You know, and that's like one of Abigail's favorite films is The Burbs, and it, like, the neighbor's dog is named Queenie. You know, that's taken from The Burbs, and it's just a great film of a social dynamic that occurs in a semi-closed pocket of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at The Burbs, and I also see, like, dynamics that emerge in an office setting. You know, you've got the guy that everybody looks to kind of lead the pack. You've got the guy who's overly militant. You have the neighbor who's always causing fucking trouble.
Mm-hmm.
You got the weird people that everybody kind of avoids because they don't want to talk to them.
Yeah.
And you've got the one asshole who lets his dog shit in everybody else's yard.
Yeah.
You know, you kind of, to me, it was interesting to take that dynamic and try to replicate that in fiction.
Yeah.
So that's where Gary came from. That's where Brad and Matilda Scott came from. You know, they were all homages to characters from the Burbs. You know, and
Yeah.
the Burbs is just a fantastic fucking movie, and I'm gonna always champion that film.
Yeah. It's funny, it's been a few years since probably when we did that episode on Darkness Dwells that I last saw it. So it's not fresh in my memory, but I wasn't thinking of the Burbs until I heard you talking about it. And I was like, oh, shit, yeah. Awesome. Excuse me. Got a tickle that won't go away. All right. Now, I was wondering, because you do write, like we haven't really talked about the cosmic horror, and I kind of wanted to keep that a little under wraps because it is mentioned that it is cosmic horror, but I think if we go in too far into that, we'll kind of ruin, the surprise that comes with it. So I was wondering, what is it that, and this isn't your first rodeo with cosmic horror either. So I'm wondering, what is it that draws you to writing cosmic horror and weird fiction?
I think it has to do with worldview and just my view on existence. You know, I started reading Lovecraft around the same time that I started reading Pollock, and I just, being introduced to Camus in high school, The Stranger, and the existentialist, philosophy. Lovecraft, as an extension of that kind of formative reading I was doing at the time. So I was like 16, 17. Lovecraft's influence and the world that he creates kind of reflects, if I could imagine a god or a, alien being that is so ridiculously huge that we are but ants at its feet. It wouldn't care, or maybe it would care, and it would care too much and, dabble in the affairs of humanity. Or humanity is just a pest that can be swept aside, when it decides it wants to, return home. So, like, I kind of, I fear this isn't making sense, but I attribute a lot of like the mythos to an existentialist way of thinking. It's like, it doesn't really matter what's going to happen because, Cthulhu's going to rise from Relia and just drive everybody mad, or in a few billion years, the sun's going to explode and engulf the planet, and none of this is going to fucking matter.
Yeah.
That's always been my draw to cosmic horror, because we are so small in the scheme of things. We are so small.
Mm-hmm.
And I like cosmic horror. To me, feels like it keeps the human ego in check in a lot of ways, because we can get so wrapped up in all of this, like all of this matters. This is priority one, when really none of this fucking matters.
Yeah.
And, we are literally a speck in a big, wide universe. And to me, that's why I gravitate toward cosmic horror, I think. I'm sure there's, a psychological reason, probably.
Yeah.
But I'm drawn to it because of that. It's how we're so small in the grand scheme of things. But something I like to do in my cosmic horror, not necessarily cosmic horror in general, but my approach to it is to look at the human element of that. It's like, okay, well, now that we know that we are, none of this matters, how do we continue?
Mm-hmm.
And, to reference Camus again, in philosophy, especially with the myth of Sisyphus, well, then why don't we just end our lives? Well, it's because the act of living is in itself a rebellion.
Mm-hmm.
It's that goes back to the myth of Sisyphus and how one must imagine Sisyphus happy, even though he's been condemned for all eternity to roll a stone up a mountain and watch it fall down at the end of the day. You find happiness in the action, in the doing, in the living,
Mm-hmm.
even though we all know we're going to die. And in a lot of ways, the way I look at it is it gives meaning to our lives, knowing that we have a set, end date. So it's like, okay, well then don't dally, do what you want to do, be happy.
Yeah.
And so I like to explore that human element in cosmic horror. So, things are pretty dire toward the end of Sundowner's Dance. And this is a good example, I think, we have the climax. It's really fucking dark. It's really fucking scary. It's very cosmic. But then in the epilogue, we scale back down and we're looking at Jerry and Katherine.
Mm-hmm.
And even though their days are limited, what are they doing to make the best of it? And that's kind of what that all symbolizes with, how they end up again in the epilogue.
I kind of
being very careful with what to say here.
Yeah.
I don't want to spoil it.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil it either, but I do want to say that I enjoyed the epilogue because there is maybe some joy there. In all the darkness, there's a little bit of joy. And I think that's the point right there. Because I totally agree with everything you just said. This is stuff I think about all the time. How nothing really matters, but in a sense, it does matter because you're existing it. You're the one living through it, right? But the joy, and what you said is the joy is in the going through it and finding the joy in the present moment, basically.
Yeah.
And despite all the darkness, because all this could end right now, or it could end tomorrow, but right now we're alive and we're talking, and then maybe we're going to go create something or go watch a movie, whatever. But we can do what we want and find fulfillment and enjoyment while we're here.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the end the epilogue kind of I wouldn't say stresses, but it mentions it. Does that make sense to you?
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, that plus I think large kaiju alien gods are pretty fucking cool. So
yeah, that's very
good. Yeah. I mean that to me is one of the reasons I'm drawn to cosmic horror. It's the aspects of it, the dread, the existential dread that comes from it, because I deal with existential dread every fucking day of my life and always have and always will. Yeah, it's just that is my preferred subgenre of horror.
Mm-hmm.
For that reason.
Do you think in order to write cosmic horror that you kind of have to have that sort of mindset, maybe even like philosophy?
I mean, do you need it? No, it's probably a good idea to have an understanding of it.
Mm-hmm.
Just to give, a better grasp of what you're writing about. But at the same time, if you're just writing a surface level story about the old ones returning, it doesn't need that extra philosophical angle at all. You don't need that, but it does enhance it, I think. And take Ligotti isn't necessarily cosmic horror per se. Like, I kind of look at Ligotti in fiction as more nihilistic as opposed to existentialist.
Very much so.
But, you know, you don't need the philosophy, you don't need the antinatalist philosophy that Ligotti himself pretty much, adheres to. But if you read his fiction understanding what that is and understanding where he's coming from, it puts a whole new angle on it, and it allows you to appreciate it more, I think.
Yeah. I can agree with that for sure. All right. From interviewing writers for over 10 years now, I have found that there are usually two ways a story comes to a writer for the first time. It's either the what if scenario, actually 3 times, not 2, but 3. Either the what if scenario, or the characters come and tell the writer what happened to them, and sometimes it's a mixture of both. How do you feel stories typically come to you, like when they first introduce themselves? Or itself, I guess.
It's different every time, it seems like. Like, sometimes it's a character's voice that speaks up, or sometimes it's a scenario that I read about in the news or something, and from that point, the what if aspect kicks in. It's like, what if this happened when this obviously horrible event transpired? What if it wasn't this, but this? And you start thinking about, you start connecting dots in your head, or I do. But it's never the same every time. Like, Sundowner's Dance, for example, the seed of that story began with a single line. The worms in my brain dance at nightfall. I wrote it down. It popped into my head. I was having another shitty day at work, and I felt like my head was just full of bees, and everything was humming, and I was overstimulated. And I couldn't just go sit in the dark for a few hours. I had to stay in the office and be on. So this thought occurred to me: the worms in my brain dance at nightfall. I don't know why. At the earliest, I can trace like the concept back to a comic strip I read when I was in college that is no longer online.
Mm-hmm.
The comic was called "The Parking Lot Is Full," and it was depicted this college professor at a chalkboard writing this complex math formula, and the students aren't paying attention, and the humor was that he was talking about, there are worms in my brain, please send help. He is actually writing that, but because nobody's paying attention, his cry for help goes unanswered. Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming that's where the worms in my brain dance at nightfall comes from, because otherwise I have no idea. It just popped in there.
Yeah.
And I wrote it down, and I had separately been thinking about, the neighborhood I live in, and, just how neighborly I want it to be, because we had just moved into our house, and, I'm not a social butterfly, so how neighborly do I want to be? And what if all the neighbors are into something weird? And what if they're worshiping the moon or something? And then, boom, I married that with the line that popped in my head, and now here we are, 7 years later.
It's kind of interesting how the unconscious mind works. Like, yeah, because like things always just kind of pop up that way, right? Like 2 separate things suddenly become one, and sometimes there's a third and a fourth, and then after, when you're done, you're looking at what you've done, and it's like, holy. Like shit, like I was thinking about all these different things, and they all just collided into this one story, or
yeah,
right? Yeah, I love that about like human existence, because like no other animal that we're aware of really exists like this. It's
that we're aware of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's fascinating to me. That's kind of like my roundabout way of asking, how did you come up with the story? But the reason why I like asking that question is because I'm very interested in how the unconscious mind works towards creativity. I think most people have a creative side to them to one degree or another, but
Yeah.
Writers and artists, musicians are, I think, a little bit different breed because they tend to attack their art a little more directly sometimes. Depends on what we're talking about here too.
Yeah.
All right, so I think that does it for the Sundowners dance. Before we go though, I do ask this of all my writers. Lately anyway. If you don't have an answer, because I forgot to email this to you, and so that's totally my bad. So I can just cut this out if you want to skip it. But
Okay.
what writer, horror or otherwise, doesn't have to be a horror writer, do you feel more people need to be talking about, like on social media and whatnot? Who's getting skipped that you absolutely love?
First one that comes to mind is Katherine Silva. She wrote the Undead Folk, Dead Folk, Nothing Land, Wild Fell. She's a main author. A lot of her stuff deals with grief and like nature, and to some degree, it's a little bit folky. And just, she's an indie author. She's out there doing it entirely on her own. Doesn't have representation. Doesn't have a big publisher backing her. She's just doing it all, and I think she deserves more recognition for that.
Is that Catherine with a C or a K?
Catherine with a K. Yeah.
Oh, I spelt it right the first time. What do you know? Is there anyone else that comes to mind?
Yeah. I mean, Amanda Headlee comes to mind. I think, Rob Ottone, Rebecca Rowland. Drawing a blank. Sorry.
No worries. That's why I should have emailed it to you first. But you did come up with some authors, so that's great. So are you able to talk about what you're working on right now?
Yeah, to a degree, and I'm working on a short story that's currently, if it turns out the way I hope, it'll be the origin story for Gus Guthrie, the host of Midnight in Southland.
Nice.
That's what I'm currently working on. I've got until the end of the month to wrap that up and turn that in. After that's done, I'm diving into notes that my agent gave me for my next novel, Revelation Road. No publisher for that yet, but hoping to change that in the near future. It is not necessarily a direct sequel, but it is a follow-up to Devil's Creek. It does tie in with the Sundowners dance in a way. Mm-hmm. Can't tell you how, because that's a spoiler.
Yeah.
But Revelation Road is pretty much going to be my main focus for the rest of the year, probably after this story's done.
Nice. I'm looking forward to it. Do you have anything coming up soon, short story or otherwise?
Yeah. So I have a Southland story coming out in issue 371 of Weird Tales magazine.
Nice.
Pretty excited to see that in print. That's a bucket list of mine, and to get accepted and into that long history of that magazine is amazing to me.
Absolutely. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I got a story coming out in that, and Tom Dede just announced the lineup for the Rack 2, that anthology he's putting out. I also have a Southland story in that one called The Woodhill Wet Nurse, and that ties in with the story from Coal Black and Infinite called Afterbirth. Mm-hmm. Those are the two I have coming out in the near future. I just showed photos of the omnibus edition of my monochrome trilogy, 3 novels. That's going to come out in September. It's a big boy. It's 666 pages long.
I saw that on I forget where, Facebook, I think, maybe.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful cover work, man.
Thank you. And also this fall, second editions of my first collection, Ugly Little Things, and also my first novella, The Final Reconciliation, are both being released in Crystal Lake.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, and next year sometime, probably the paperback edition of Sundowners.
So there's lots of Keisling in the future.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff coming out. It's kind of familiar stuff for a lot of my longtime fans, but for newer folks, it'll be a good opportunity for them to dive in.
Yeah. Speaking of that, if there's anybody listening who's new to your work, where would you direct them? What would you direct them to read first?
Direct them to read first. Probably Devil's Creek. That's probably the best way to kind of get caught up on things. If you're put off by the size of that book, I mean, it's over 500 pages. Start with Cold Black and Infinite, my second collection. If you can get your hands on it, that does come out next year from Bad Hand. But that's also a good primer. My first collection, Ugly Little Things, is also currently in print, so you can find that on Amazon or wherever books are sold. But if you can get your hands on Devil's Creek, from your library, or it's also available in audio. It's not going away on audio.
Mm-hmm.
That would probably be my recommendation. That's awesome. What I'm mostly known for.
Excellent. Now, final question: where's the best place for readers to connect with you online to keep up to date with what you're coming up with?
My website, toddkeisling.com, I keep that up to date with news and upcoming appearances. It's also where you can sign up for my newsletter, which is monthly. That's probably those two best places. Beyond that, I am active on Blue Sky and Instagram, at Todd Keisling. So that's where you can find me on social media and bug me.
Awesome. Well, I want to give you a big thanks. It's been, as I said, there's been a lot that's happened since we last talked. So I appreciate you coming on and talking with me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Jason.
You're always invited to come back. Thank you. If I ever come at you again saying, "Hey, Todd, you want to come on my show?" I hope that you'll accept. And,
I'm sure I will.
And we'll talk to you next time.
All right, man. Thanks again.